Singapore reports the first cases of children aged 5 to 11 with serious side effects after their COVID-19 jab. Inflation climbs to 2.4% in January, the highest since September 2012. And in Living Well, what are the causes of period pain? And why do some women have it worse than others? Good evening, you're watching The Big Story with me, Harianto Diman. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you will not miss a single episode. There have been 10 cases of children aged 5 to 11 having serious side effects after their COVID-19 vaccination. These are the first reported cases of serious side effects in this age group since the vaccination program was extended to them on December 27th last year. According to the Health Sciences Authority's latest vaccine safety update, serious side effects include seizures, appendicitis, drops in blood pressure, allergic reactions, abnormal kidney function, and swelling of small blood vessels. There have also been 280 cases of non-serious side effects in the 5 to 11 age group compared with 6 in the previous update. Such side effects include facial swelling, fever, rash, chest discomfort, palpitations, and shortness of breath. There's been no cases of myocarditis or pericarditis, two heart-related conditions sometimes reported after vaccination. To help ease the patient load at private clinics, from this Friday until March 10th, the operating hours of some public health preparedness clinics will be extended. Selected clinics will operate up to 11 p.m. every night and 2 to 5 p.m. on weekend afternoons. Some polyclinics will also operate on Saturday afternoons and Sunday mornings. Now, this move comes as Singapore is seeing recent highs in daily case numbers, with yesterday's figure marking a new record. 26,032 new COVID-19 cases reported last night. Apart from 301 imported infections, the rest were local. And among those, the vast majority, over 22,600, were detected through ART, which means the patients displayed mild or no symptoms. Almost 3,100 were detected through PCR tests. Earlier, I caught up with Associate Professor Alex Cook, the Vice Dean of Research at NUS's Swassey Hock School of Public Health. I asked him whether 2 days of record daily cases were a coincidence or something else.
We get consistent differences on different days of the week throughout the pandemic. It's something that we've seen earlier in the Delta wave, for example, as well. It's also something that we see with other infectious diseases like influenza, diarrhea, etc. You can imagine why that if you're feeling unwell on a Saturday night, then you might hand until the Monday because your regular clinic might be closed on the Sunday, for example. So we'll end up then seeing more people going to the clinic at the start of the week, and then those that test positive on the PCR, they're only going to get the results on the Tuesday. So that would tend to lead to a spike on the Tuesday the next day. For endemic illnesses, so things like influenza, etc., then we'll often see fewer consultations towards the end of the week because fewer people need to get an MC to get off work or off school. And it may be that something similar is at play with COVID as well. And that might be one reason why we see that kind of a sawtooth pattern in the number of cases across the course of the week. That's one of the reasons why I think it's important that we don't get invested too much in the daily fluctuations, but rather that we look at these weekly trends. And so when we do that, we look at yesterday's case counts. It represented about a 30 to 40% growth compared to the Tuesday of last week. And actually that suggests that it's possibly a slight leveling off that could possibly indicate that the peak is near.
So talking about, you mentioned the peak, right? So with 26,032 cases reported yesterday, how significant is this spike? And based on your modeling, is this the peak we've been waiting for?
Well, I guess we've got two lenses that we can use to try to interpret the numbers. And one of them is modeling. So the models that my colleagues and I put together at the start of the year suggested for our middling scenario that perhaps there might actually be about 25,000 cases a day at the peak, with a worst case scenario of around about 40,000 cases. I want to caveat that both of those numbers would represent weekly averages, i.e. they don't account for the Tuesday spike. So even in our middling scenario, we would still expect some growth before we get to the average of 25,000 a day. The other caveat is, of course, these are just models. They don't account for some of the changes in behavior or in testing patterns that we've seen over the last few weeks. The second lens that we can think about is how we can compare how Singapore is to other countries that have already reached peak Omicron. Now, this comparison is not exact because all countries are different, testing rates are different, the level of immunity is different, but it does give us a bit of a gauge for where we are compared to others. So at one extreme, if you look at Denmark, its peak daily cases per million are higher than where we are just now by about 160%, right? And what that means is that between 2 to 3 times as many cases as we are seeing a day is what they saw a few weeks ago when they had their peak. Denmark has very high ascertainment of infections. And so in a sense, Denmark may be like a worst case scenario for us. But if we do follow the Denmark trend, then it would mean that we would reach that level at a current growth rate we're at after a few more weeks, 2 or 3 more weeks. In France, they also peaked at a higher level than what we are seeing just now, by about 80% higher, so almost double. So if we're like France, then it will take us perhaps a fortnight to grow up to that number. Now, at the other extreme, we can look at places like the US or the UK or Germany. They all peaked at a level which is lower than Singapore's current numbers, somewhere between 10 to 30% lower. So if actually Singapore is more like the US or the UK than we are like France or Denmark, then we should have peaked already. And in fact, maybe we did peak yesterday. We don't know. We'll find that out. And like I say, these cross-country comparisons, they're not very exact, but they do suggest that even if we have not peaked yet, we will soon reach peak Omicron.
And Professor, once that happens, we reach the peak, we go into stabilization phase or number or period. What daily numbers should we be expecting then?
Well, the problem with all these day-to-day fluctuations is that they make it tricky to see where exactly the real peak of the epidemic is. And that's why when we're trying to monitor have we peaked or not, actually what I think is the most important value is the weekly growth rate, because it smoothens out things like the Tuesday effect and so on. So the number that I'm going to be focusing on personally when I'm looking at what our current situation is for the next few weeks is going to be that weekly growth rate. Once it dips below 1, that tells us, and it's on a sustained below 1, we're not just a one-off day, that tells us that we're in a downward trend that we've all been waiting for. Now, when we come down from that downward trend, then we'll reach a level of something closer to 0 than where we are just now, basically at a point at which there will still be the virus circulating in the community, but that we don't need to worry about it overwhelming our healthcare system.
Well, thank you so much for your perspectives, Professor Alex Cook, Associate Professor Alex Cook from the Swansea Hawk School of Public Health at NUS. In other news, in a letter on Monday to public hospitals and polyclinics, Health Minister Ong Ye Kung said healthcare workers do not have to take unpaid leave if they run out of sick leave. Instead, their sick leave can be recorded as hospitalization leave. Mr. Ong also wrote that public messages will be pushed out to encourage those with mild COVID-19 symptoms to recover at home and for employers to not require MCs from COVID-positive workers.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and it demands a firm response from the international community.
U.S. President Joe Biden announcing new sanctions targeting Russian banks and billionaires in retaliation for Russia recognizing 2 breakaway regions of Ukraine and sending troops there. The European Union, Germany and UK also unveiled sanctions against Moscow. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said during a joint appearance with Ukraine's foreign minister that he has cancelled a meeting with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov that was planned for Thursday. Ukraine's ambassador to Singapore, Katerina Zelenko, spoke to the Straits Times earlier today. Now, she says her countrymen and women are managing to remain calm in the midst of the crisis, even though memories of Russia invading Crimea in 2014 are still fresh in their minds.
You know, in Ukraine, everyone is aware of the existing threats. Everyone knows what the enemy is capable of. As I already mentioned, we've been at war since 2014. However, in the current tense situation, Ukrainian citizens and business entities remain calm and continue to perform their daily activities. Due to the crisis management efforts by Ukraine's government, and thanks to the increased support from our partners, the situation is now under control. And in fact, you will not feel a lot of panic or anxiety among people in Ukraine, because they know that we need to stay vigilant. And this is something which unites the nation.
In local headlines, Singapore's consumer prices continued to climb in January, with core inflation up further to 2.4% on a year-on-year basis, the highest since September 2012, when it was also 2.4%. The rise was driven by higher inflation for food and electricity and gas, as well as a slower pace of decline in the cost of retail and other goods. COE premiums for larger cars surging past $90,000 in the first bidding exercise after the government announced higher taxes for luxury cars. The last time premiums in this category were this high was back in February 2013. Premiums in every other category also climbing today. Singapore's Court of Appeal upheld the death sentence imposed on Teo Kim Heng, a former property agent who strangled his pregnant wife and 4-year-old daughter in January 2017. He spent a week with the bodies in their Woodlands flat before setting the corpses on fire. Teo's appeal was dismissed that he was suffering from depression, which diminished his responsibility for his acts, and that he should be convicted of culpable homicide instead. Now, a new type of scam that you should take note of: scammers tricking people into using their SingPass app to scan SingPass QR codes sent via SMS to authorize access into digital services. The police say that scammers could misuse the access by registering businesses, subscribing for new mobile lines, or opening new bank accounts under the victim's name. The police also warn against scanning QR codes delivered via SMS and messaging platforms like WhatsApp. Many girls and women get it at some stage in their lives, but it can be difficult to talk about it. Painful periods are very common and can usually be effectively treated. But for some women, the pain is so severe that it can disrupt their lives. Now, a study by period care brand Blood found that almost half of the women surveyed admit to regularly taking time off work to deal with period pain or to avoid the awkwardness in the office during that time of the month. More than 1 in 2 have admitted to lying about their reason for absence to avoid ridicule or discrimination at the workplace. And 71% said they feel pressured to be at their desk even though they are unable to perform to the expected standard due to period pain during the first few days of their cycle. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Liana Koh, an obstetrician and gynecologist at STONG Laparoscopy and Fertility Practice. I asked her what are the causes of period pain and why do some women have more pain than others.
Okay, so the most common reasons for period pains, gynae-wise, would be fibroids. Fibroids are basically growths in the muscle of the womb that can cause contractions and more pain during the menses. There's also ovarian cysts. So these are growths in the ovary that can also increase period pains. And lastly, there's also a condition that's quite common called endometriosis. This is actually a condition that's getting more and more awareness now. And it's a condition where the menstrual cells, when they backflow through the fallopian tubes, it actually causes a lot of scarring, a lot of inflammation around the pelvis, which is the area around the womb and the ovaries. And this results in even more pain that can be actually quite excruciating for many women. So I would say these are the three most common reasons I see. There's also one where the muscle of the womb is a bit thicker than usual, and that's known as adenomyosis. But essentially, in order to differentiate between these conditions, you would need to see a gynae in order to do a scan and evaluation.
So, what are some effective ways to relieve period pain, and can improving your diet help?
So unfortunately, diet is a very hard thing to do research on because there are so many variations. But there are some studies to show that women who lack calcium as well as vitamin D do tend to have a bit more period pains. So I would say, I do tell my patients, there's no harm in taking a diet rich in calcium and vitamin D. This includes dairy products, milk, cheese. Vitamin D is found in things like green leafy vegetables, spinach, tofu. So all these would be good to maintain a healthy diet.
Doctor, women shouldn't have to struggle with period pain every month, but are there certain symptoms that require immediate attention?
So I would say a lot of us do suffer with period pains. If they are bearable, meaning they do not need any pain relief, painkillers, that can probably be just observed. But if you do have pain that is affecting your life, you need to take medical leave once a month, or you need strong painkillers, you need to see a doctor for prescription. Worst case scenario, even see an emergency department for medications, then definitely you would need to see a gynecologist to exclude the following conditions that I did talk about.
Doctor, thank you so much for your sharing. Dr. Liana Koh from the STONG Laparoscopy and Fertility Practice. For more on the topic of period pain, we have stories of women in Singapore speaking candidly about it. Have a look online at str.sg/livingwell. And those are our top stories for today. For more news, visit straitstimes.com and our YouTube channel for more videos. Remember to subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Haryanto Diman. See you tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.